So, again, looking at some of the languages here, C doesn't really have a slogan, but if it did, I think it would be economy. The language is terse, compact, relatively full-featured, and relatively low-level. It's a low-level language. Perl obviously does have the slogan that there's more than one way to do it. And to a greater extent, PHP is borrowed from this mindset, particularly looking at the web. So whereas Perl, there's more than one way to create an LDAP server, with PHP, there's more than one way to create a PHP bulletin board system. Java obviously is the right one to run anywhere, which most Java programmers know is just not true. The main strength with C is your efficiency. You're dealing with memory, you're dealing with more low-level applications, or at least you can. With Perl, again, your major strength is flexibility. You can do the same task any number of ways, and Perl in some ways tends to adapt itself to your style. If you like regular expressions, there's plenty of them out there. If you like coding in some other fashion, if you like lots of variables, you can handle all of that in Perl. And it's really non-restrictive in a lot of ways. With Java, obviously the goal with that is portability, so that you can write your code and then have it run on any number of virtual machines on any different variety of platforms. String manipulation, probably one of the most important factors in web design. In C, from experience, I can say it's difficult. You see you're dealing with strings that are really integers, and they know it. And they don't really want to be treated like you treat a word or a phrase or a summary of a paragraph, unless you're willing to go and put in the work to write your own functions and routines that will do that for you. In Perl, it's a piece of cake. In some ways, it's almost too easy. You can find yourself getting confused about what you're actually pattern matching and what you're actually dealing with, and a single line of code can transform an elegant paragraph into a pile of rubble, basically. So incredibly powerful string manipulation. Java, I would say, is somewhere between the two. External packages. In C, not a whole lot. Certainly you can include all kinds of functions and features. In Perl with CPAN, there's just a tremendous wealth of packages. And again, with Perl, if you thought up a project, someone else has probably already thought it up and posted it to CPAN. So it's typically the first place to look for large-scale projects. Java has some packages. It doesn't really seem to have benefited from the community support that Perl has had. Again, data typing in C is incredibly strong. A char is an integer, and that's all there is to it, and don't you forget it. Perl is an incredibly loose data type language. It'll basically decide for you when you're doing operations, if you're dealing with a string or an integer, how to best combine those or get substrings out. Java, however, is a strongly typed language as well. So there again, you've got to explicitly cast things before you start doing manipulations between different data types. Package documentation, while there's not a whole lot out there for C, it's incredibly thorough. With Perl and the CPAN modules, I think Peter and I were talking about this just before the presentation, it can be pretty variable. You don't necessarily get inside the coder's head just through their documentation alone. So tremendous support from the community for packages, but not necessarily a real consistency of documentation and approaches, partly because the main focus here is flexibility. There's more than one way to do it. And guess what? People do it more than one way. With Java, it's relatively thorough, and I would say the language itself lends itself toward better documentation. Obviously, C is a procedural language. Perl, you can do it either way, and Java's an object-oriented language. I don't know if there was a slogan for PHP, so I made one up. I call it the fastest growing web language. I've heard that, and I've heard a lot of different statistics to back it up. It's the #1 supported module for PHP, having well over 50% of the share for Apache. And it's just incredibly popular. It's gaining speed tremendously in Europe, and it's still really holding its own here in the States as well. I think the main strength of PHP, though some people swear by the PHP GTK and designing applications in PHP, really it's a web applications language. It's designed to do things on the web that other languages would take more lines of code to do. And then, the rest of this, essentially, you're looking at a lot of borrowing from Perl, with some sort of striking balances between C and Java. And again, with PHP 5 coming up, we're